when you come into church and someone says, hey, like, tell me about yourself, you typically tell people about things that relate to your spiritual background. But you don't typically tell them stuff that relates to all of you, your likes, your dislikes, your dreams, your hopes, your culture, you may tell them where you come from, but not how that shaped you. And so it's very interesting because I feel like sometimes the church makes us feel like certain parts of our stories don't matter. Like the church makes us feel sometimes like we don't have a diverse story outside of what Jesus has saved us from, but not outside of what we desire, what we hope, what we're gifted in, what we're talented in. So I think sometimes this question is a function of the church making us almost disembodied people.
Right.
People who don't have an experience in our own skin, in our own bodies, with our own situations. And the church just kind of makes us, whatever is utility for the church kind of emphasizes. Whatever is not utility for the church doesn't focus on. So I think sometimes people they come into church and they're like, wait a second. So, okay, I guess this utility. So you come in and you have to adopt an entirely different worship style. Because culturally, like, oh, let me separate how I naturally would worship culturally from what this space will allow. So let me just put that off to the side. And I'll say, I'll learn. And because we're great learners, we learn, but we're not incorporating the other parts of our story. And so it's really helpful to think about the oneness that should be in our identities, because it maybe will help us think through how we can actually be healthy, whole Black Christians.
Because I'm thinking about on a practical level, like if we're talking about this relationship or the dynamic between being both Black and Christian, how does that work itself out on a ground level, day-to-day basis? Well, one of the ways is I cannot separate the fact that I'm Black from my faith and from my understanding of faith. For instance, the way I read the book of Exodus as a person of African descent in the United States. Right? Like, there's no way I can read about the Hebrew slaves being liberated from the Egyptians without thinking about race-based chattel slavery in the United States and the fact that my ancestors were enslaved.
Absolutely.
Like on a very practical, but what you're saying, in a lot of church spaces, they don't want you to really highlight that. They may not squash it and say, don't ever think about having been a slave or whatever, but it's not emphasized. And the implicit message there is that it's not important. And this is one of the things that I've, in the past year or so, come to a realization, because a lot of folks, particularly in like predominantly white church, it's not that they're calling us the N-word per se, right?
Right.
It's that there are parts of our identity that are invisible to them and therefore unimportant. So that was my experience in my high school youth group. I'm still friends with a lot of the folks, including the youth pastor of that group, right? They never said a negative thing about me being Black. They just never brought it up, which made me think this is not integral to my faith. Apparently, if everybody around me is not talking about it, if the stuff that affects me and my family and my community is not on the radar here, well, then maybe it's not that important. Now, that's my very young Christian understanding of it. Now I understand sociologically, historically, theologically, they weren't there, right? But it wasn't unimportant. But when we ask that question about being Black and Christian, I think part of the question behind the question is, does God care about my Blackness?